Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, actually.
Out of curiosity, do you know what generates your power in Baton Rouge? What's your power source?
Natural gas.
Petrochemical.
Okay, so CO2 emissions, all the good stuff.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of nuclear? Anything?
Awesome.
Any knowledge? Positive, negative, I don't know.
Positive.
General Hospital plant is just north of Baton Rouge.
Okay, so I learned something a week ago when I led this tour because I got one of the nuclear engineers to talk in my son's 5th grade class. And so they break things down really simple when they talk to 5th graders, which turns out I then can understand them. But if you were to consume nuclear power from the time you were a baby till 90 years, how much of the waste do you think you would account for volumetrically? How big do you think it would be? Like the size of a 55-gallon drum, the size compared to CO2, right? Like you fly a plane, you do all these other things, you've got a lot of greenhouse gas waste emissions, etc. How much waste would you personally be responsible for if you would only consume nuclear power? Do you have any idea?
Penny.
It's a shot glass.
It's the size of a soda can.
Wow.
Which to me blew my mind. I could not believe that was it. It's really, really bad. Like that's what they say, really bad, but we know how to compartmentalize it in concrete and take care of it. But it's the size of a soda can. So from an energy density standpoint, it's really the way we can get off of greenhouse gas emitting fuel sources, power sources. The United States consumes some crazy amount of power compared to the rest of the world. Bill Gates and Nathan are very committed to nuclear power. We have TerraPower, which is the traveling wave reactor. It's one of the coolest projects that we work on here. And what we're showing you here is our interpretation of a fast neutron from TerraPower's traveling wave reactor. It's really a ping pong ball, and it's going through a sheet of plywood, and in a minute it'll be going through a ping pong paddle, like so, you'll see here. But you may or may not be familiar with Newton's laws. One of them is force equals mass times acceleration. A tiny little near massless object accelerated to 2.1 times the speed of sound could impart a tremendous amount of energy into a useless ping pong paddle. So much so that you couldn't actually hit the ball. The ball just goes right through it. Why would we want to show you that? What's that got to do with anything?
Because it's fun?
Well, that is exactly why Nathan wanted us to build it. Somebody said, Nathan, we could build a supersonic ping pong cannon, should we? Yes! And so we did. But then after he saw it, he came up with the analogy of talking about it like traditional nuclear reactors use what they call slow neutrons. They try and slow them down using water. And a slow neutron would be this. There's not that much energy, comparatively speaking, in me throwing a ping pong ball around, to what TerraPower is going to do as a fast neutron. And theirs is actually going to go closer to the speed of light than, 2 times the speed of sound. But even at 2 times the speed of sound, you can see how much energy is present in just that. Now, make it near the speed of light, and you've got all of this material ready to go, and it upstages to plutonium and drives the heat of reaction, and then we pull all of that heat out of the reactor core using a molten sodium. So it's an alkali metal. The biggest danger there is water, so don't get it wet. They've operated those for quite a while safely. So the neat thing about TerraPower's reactor and reactor core is that if you had a natural disaster, a Fukushima or some other thing, and you didn't actively stay present to manage this rate of reaction, the rate would start to slow down. And as it would slow down, it would basically burn out like a bonfire. Unless you keep that bonfire going, it just stops. So eventually, you'd never have the threat of a nuclear fallout type thing because it would just shut itself down. You have to actively keep the fuel in its orientation. So what's neat is the light water reactors that do most of the stuff today, they use uranium-235 typically. And they kick off about 1.6 neutrons per atom, and they get modulated by water. They don't want them to go too fast because that's what keeps it going. If it goes too fast, it heats up, it melts down, and we got problems. and then we have a pressurized water reactor, and that creates problems. With this one, we want it to go fast. We want it to get hot. We're going to use molten sodium, which rather than being 100 degrees C in terms of the heat transfer fluid, we can be upwards of 500, 600, 700 degrees C and get heat out of the reactor core that way. Because it won't, it's not pressurized at that point. But this is what it looks like when it goes through a pallet. And if you walk, as you walk down here, make sure you take a peek at all the ping pong shrapnel. There are pieces of ping pong ball literally embedded into this piece of plywood from when we've shot it. We don't shoot it that often, but it's quite something to see happen, and it sounds like a stick of dynamite going on. It's really loud. Any questions? Well, we're going to look inside TerraPower's doors, and you can see fuel ducts, which are hexagonal shaped ducts, fuel pins and bundles, which are what go inside the ducts. And then you'll see a big crane assembly, and that's how we move the fuel around. And that's what we're working on, is testing that we can actually move the fuel to keep the kinetics of the reaction going. And that's proving out the high-performance supercomputer models that they developed about 8 years ago. Yeah?
It's not a weird question, but what would happen if a person sitting in front of this thing?
It wouldn't be pleasant.
I didn't think so.
Probably significant injury and or death, depending on where you
Do it happen deck.
It would be pretty ugly. Come on this way. So when we go upstairs, you'll have a better view of this, but just kind of take note. This is all engineering and testing for the traveling wave reactor that TerraPower is aiming to build. It is supported by Bill Gates, by Nathan Myhrvold, and it is in the same building as Modernist Cuisine and Global Good and Modernist Photography. There's a little bit of everything here for everybody, so it's kind of a fun place. Eric, you ready?
I'm born ready. Bring it on.
All right.
All right.
What an
Follow me. We're gonna go.
Recently, they just got some public and some government contracts. They're going to have some more shit out of national labs. We were supposed to, we had a joint venture to build and test reactors.
I want to see it.
But I'm responsible for my operations, so IT, engineering, security, safety. BS in biology and a master's program. We're gonna let them go up there and we'll power it off. Yeah.
Come together around here. We're gonna be looking at that funky looking chamber here.
Yes.
Absolutely, 100%.
You don't look like a cornerback.
No?
More like a linebacker.
I was. Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi, have you
Yeah.
heard that football? Junior football league.
Oh, gotcha. You didn't play in high school? Pitcher? Catcher?
Oh, yeah.
Nice. Tough. Yeah, you gotta be a tough dude.
Sound video?
We don't have a really good reason for having
All right.
But it serves as a good example of what once was thought to be a really big technical innovation in wireless power transfer. I don't know if you saw the little displays down there. We actually have a company that's doing some Internet of Things, wireless power transfer technologies, and metamaterials that actually work more or less safely. We'll wait and see on that one. But you can see watching this why wireless power transfer from here might have been a bit of a problem. And it's It goes louder. That was about halfway, right? When it goes really loud, sometimes the TV screens flicker out.
Once more? One more?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cameras ready?
Thank you, Eric. So sometimes we play music files through that too. So we have a full functioning biotech group here. Their division of work for global good. I don't know how much stuff talking about global good or science global good is the fund that Bill advises on and has us do invention technology development for low resource settings. What's interesting about that is we work to innovate in areas where the rest of the world is solved the problem by plugging something in, really. So our innovations typically have to take into account that power is the thing that's not reliable or available in these areas. Initially downstairs you saw the vaccine cold storage. That's a good example. Nobody in their right mind would build a thermos to keep ice for a month. You just go get more ice. That's not how it works. So what we have over here is a full display of milk, sort of the story behind milk. We started working on milk, believe it or not, about 8 years ago. They were finishing up the original culinary book. There was some thought that we had these really amazing immersion circulators. Maybe we could use those to sort of hot hold the milk, and it would be a low temperature pasteurization. But the problem was that the farmers had to milk the cows at night in order to have the cows ready to milk again in the morning to take that milk to market. But they didn't have refrigeration for the night milk, so the night milk got dumped. So the opportunity that our engineers were looking at was, can we increase the amount of money to these small shareholder farmers by giving them an outlet for their night milk? And we spent a lot of time on that problem. We gummed up a lot of immersion circulators. We fouled up all kinds of things. And we spent significant resources and time doing it. And the thing that we learned was that they really just needed a good container to take their milk to market in, which is what this is. So it started off being some cans, maybe a yellow jug, nothing standardized. And the part of the story that I find really amazing is that we all thought this was really stupid. It's a plastic jug. How is this, like, you want to think you're really technical, you're really innovating? No, I've been educated. So there are a tremendous number of things in this silly little can that have been well thought. This funnel screws on, provides high contrast so that when you're milking, they can see if the cow's got an infection, keeps grass and feces out. It's a big wide mouth for ease and cleanability. It's got the lid attached, because if it wasn't, they would lose it. It's got a spot here for the bungee cord. It's got two little spots here for the bungee cord hooks. It's got a really rigid handle. It's got a dimple on the bottom for stacking. It's got graduation marks so you know exactly how much is in there volumetrically speaking. This was all done using a blow mold manufacturing process. And so we had to invest in creating the tooling to make the blow mold manufacturing process. That tooling was done at a company down in California. And I have some responsibility here to report to accounting at the end of the year where our assets are. It's always fun because sometimes our assets never make it here. In the case of this tooling, it was never on site. But I knew the guy that was in charge of the project, and when I was looking at the asset list, I said, well, that's it was like $65,000 on the book. That's not here. That's never been here. And accounting's like, what do you mean that's never been here? go, well, I'm pretty sure that that was something that Morgan bought to build the can. Huh. So we go talk to Morgan, we find out, oh, not only is it not here, it's not down in California either. They shipped it to a blow mold manufacturer in Kenya. So Kenya now has the tooling. It turns out, what I thought was a dumb little can turned into a full industry, a dairy industry in Kenya. They now have the tooling to make their own blow molded jerry cans in Kenya. It was so successful that we've heard of, I can't verify this, that an Afghanistan company copied it. And we know we really hit the mark when somebody wants to steal our ideas within global good. Because if it's that good and they want to steal it, then we've done our job and we don't have to do anything else. And that is when it's really cool. That's not necessarily the way of the commercial world, the capital world. And then this story goes on to cover artificial insemination to increase yields of milk. And what this represents is the global development technology portfolio within global good. So there were things downstairs related to the grain dryer, water to go. Those are all part of the global development technologies portfolio. Then there's the global health technologies portfolio. And GHT represents everything that's in the biolab behind this wall, and it's all primary healthcare diagnostic type work. Lateral flow assay, lateral flow development, making diagnostics so that healthcare workers have access to information to make informed decisions that healthcare workers in high resource settings have. In low resource settings, they don't have access to simple tests. And so this is a way to improve that. And that's one of the big pushes. I think, unless there's any questions, Scott's got
So
some-
let me ask this one question. So you were talking about at night they got to dump it out because there's no
We never
refrigeration
solved
or
that.
whatever.
They still do.
Right. So then we went into this technology and how that improves everything, blah blah blah. So go back to the milk at night. So did we do anything about? Is there anything to do about that? Okay.
Refrigeration.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's refrigeration. If you had it, that would be great. But that requires power.
Yeah.
And power is unreliable. Until TerraPower is on the scene, it will always be the limited resource that it is. So at the moment, no, it was clear that a little bit of milk that they're going to sacrifice at night to make it so that the cows can get through the night and still be able to milk in the morning is. And the other thing, I think there was talk about making cheese. They could take that milk and make cheese or yogurt or other things with it. It's just not it's not something that's a staple of their diet apparently. So they just don't eat it. It's a great question though. I mean, like, what happened? What did you guys do? Nothing. We grew a lot of bacteria, to be honest with you.
It's possible if we put tortilla chips there,
Yeah.
then that would stimulate the
Queso,
cheese
yeah.
industry.
There you go.
We'll try that
Yeah,
out.
makes sense.
Speaking of food,
Yeah.
follow me over to the doorway here at the MC Kitchen.
That's the refrigeration company.
No, that's what I'm saying.
One thing that you can think of is what's the temperature underground? You put in
Well, but if you think of like the ground's reading a lot of heat so that geothermal energy is just gonna radiate.
Not always. It sort of started growing when I was in college, and the on-campus dining choices were so bad that it forced me to be passionate about food. So this is Modernist Cuisine. This is our culinary research lab that exists to study the science of how cooking works and then publish our results in the form of these ginormous, lavish cookbooks. How many of you have heard about Modernist Cuisine previous? Awesome. So you know we make gargantuan books, and you may know that we really like to cut stuff in half. The whole point and the impetus of Modernist Cuisine was that cooking has always been a process that involves science, but we were never taught about it that way. The recipe never included why. if you went to culinary school, some French guy in a tall hat would yell at you, and the worst question you could ask is, how come? Right? That would get you kicked out of class that day. But that's wrong. Cooking is a scientific process, and if you can understand the science inside cooking, you can innovate. You can do a better job. You can make more delicious food. In the mid-2000s, this new style of cooking emerged that was referred to by journalists as molecular gastronomy. We and most people in the industry prefer the term modernist cuisine. But just like the modernist movement in the visual arts, this was sort of a reaction to tradition. To say, well, tradition's all well and good, we'll acknowledge those things, but let's sort of break the creative boundaries that tradition imposes and do things a new way. And that new way often involved things that looked more like science. So using hydrocolorants, so a bunch of white powders to thicken or make gels or use purification or all of these things. Borrowing innovations from food industry, so from food process, but then putting them in the context of fine dining. Tools like sous vide and using centrifuge and dehydration and rotary evaporators and all this kind of stuff started to appear in a cluster of very high-end chefs who were exploring this way of cooking. And that was super great. The problem was that if you wanted to learn any of these techniques, the only way was to go work at one of these restaurants. That was it. There was no better way to spread this information. So Nathan had this idea, well, sous vide is clearly such a cool thing, but nobody's written a book about it. Maybe I'll write a book about sous vide. He was participating in some online forums and helping do some of the math of heat transfer and things that are relevant. So he thought, I'm going to write an enormous book on sous vide. It's going to be 600 pages. 2,400 pages later, we ended up with Modernist Cuisine. Because you can't talk about sous vide without then talking about food safety and pasteurization. And then if you're talking about that, we might as well talk about microbiology. And then it grows and grows and grows until you start at the invention of fire and contemporary cooking techniques. But believe it or not, that wasn't comprehensive enough. We left out all of bread, baking, and most of pastry and dessert. So our most recent book releases are these 5 volumes here called Modernist Bread. And it is another 2,500 pages only on bread. No cakes, no croissants, just bread. And right now, the team is at work, as you might guess, on Modernist Pizza, which will be a very deep dive on the history and science and techniques of all kinds of pizza. The team's traveled all over the world and has ongoing recipe development, experiments, learning from other pizzolos as they're called, but also an investigation of the tools and technologies. So last week I took thermal imagery of the inside of our wood-fired pizza oven because there are a lot of reasons to suspect it's not very well designed if what you want is even heated. There's a big hot fire source on one side of the dome. You can kind of predict what's going to. So we're going to start to raise these questions with real scientific evidence and experiments that are actually fairly simple to do to probe these sorts of things. But if our books were just textbooks explaining the science, they wouldn't have a very big audience. We would lose people, maybe just some professional food scientists who would like it. So we put a stake in the ground to say that stunning photography and these beautiful visuals are going to be a key component of what we do in the books. Their purpose is to bring people in, so you can get sucked in by the visuals, and then before you know it, we've taught you science. So that's the idea. If you transition over here, I'm not going to bludgeon you with PowerPoint, but I've got a few things that are better to show than that.